Okay, let's hit Borodino again. This is for the actual battle. I just really wanted to show Marshall Ney, the outstanding artwork there. I'm just not a fan of the cartoony kind of stuff. Okay, so as you can see, lots and lots of units set up. Looking up the Borodino scenario itself, there's a fair amount of errata for it. Some map errata that isn't really errata as far as I can tell. It says the great readout's missing. Tells me to put it here, but I see readouts there, so I don't know. As far as I know, there was only one printing of this sucker. Maybe some of the maps were misprinted. That seems really unlikely, but who knows. Okay, so this uses the full rules, but there's some differences. I didn't catch up on all. Some of the counters are in wrong places. I may catch that up a little later. But as you can see, there's a fair amount of setup to do on this. The Grand Army is considered a little weaker, so some of the numbers to the army units are lower than you'd expect for French units in this era. The Russians have some very low units. We'll talk about them in a little bit. Those are like pike armed mainly. Kind of go over who's where, but we'll catch that as we go. So, do we have the French activations here? No. Okay. I think that's back here, actually. Yeah. No, that's the wrong game. So the biggest thing here is that the Russians are divided into basically two armies and a reserve. And within those armies, we've got wings, but those aren't dealt with at all in the game. So what we're going to have is the First Army of the West, which is mainly over here, running, I think, from here down. See, they have a white line on them. And the Second Army of the West has a almost white yellow line, and I can't tell the difference, oh shit, there at all between them. And then the reserve is going to be distinguished by these dashed lines. The French, Murat's kind of a special case. We'll talk about him as well. But the French mainly are just allocated into their corps, but there are some associated. So these were First Corps Cav that are assigned to be a part of the Cav Reserve, and they're specifically assigned to a unit within it. I don't even know which one that they're attached to, and I'll have to look that up consistently because they don't have the color coding of the units. Each of the Cav units has its own little color coding for it, but these guys have the color coding of the corps that they were part of, and they're now detached from those corps and attached to the unit, to the Cav unit. Likewise, there's a couple of First Corps divisions here that are attached, I believe, to the Fourth Corps, and again, not colored to operate as such. You just have to kind of remember, and there's no indication whatsoever. There's no rules for returning them to where they were supposed to be, which is something I would do right away. You can see at the beginning of my errata. Okay. So, for the Russian command, Kutuzov, who I haven't put on the board yet. Have I? No, I haven't yet. He can go anywhere on the board. I haven't decided yet. Is allowed to give a certain number of commands out, which varies depending on what he commands. He's allowed to put 3 of the commands of Barclay's army under orders. Now, Barclay's the first army over on that side. And then hopefully these are distinguished here. Here's the reserve. Yeah, here's Barclay's army. And here's Bagration's second army. And they were on terrible terms. And Barclay, more than that, had just been had just been relieved of command of the army to put Kutuzov in charge. If you want to put the second army under orders, you only get 2 chits for them. You can't split between the 2. Or you can put one of the Russian reserve commands under orders. There's 2 there, basically, I believe. The guards, essentially, and then an artillery reserve back here. The reserve's not able to move at all if it's not given orders. I'm not sure what's supposed to happen if you give orders to a unit of the reserve, if the other one is allowed to move or change orders. I don't know. I'll make my mind up as I go. This is like Charles, right? And otherwise, though, if you get an activation group, you can roll for orders for the individual units within them. Individual units? Yeah, in order to try to change orders. And in these cases, there's a number. And there's no number on the reserve counters. You can see the reserve counters are homemade. They're just one of the misprints in the game. We have some other neat stuff here. The French Cav Reserve is a huge force. It's all of this and these, made up of several different commands. All of them are activated by a single command chit, but if Napoleon wants to give orders to Murat, Murat is only able to transmit the orders based on his chit, which has 2 numbers instead of 1. That second number there is how many of his sub-commands he can give orders, he can put under orders. The other guys can roll for orders if need be. And they use the larger number as normally. Another errata. The game lasts until 1945, which means there's 2 turns that aren't on here. There's also an optional rule that doesn't have the map support it claims in the rules. GMT's gotten better overall. There's no question. This was 2004. They were still a little bit iffier. It's no worse than you'd expect from an S&T. Okay, the French Imperial Guard, as normal, cannot move unless it's under orders. But, well, no, I'm sorry. It cannot be activated if it hasn't been given orders in the orders phase, i.e. they have no chance to roll for it. But it looks to me like they're allowed to move and presumably fight, even if they're not under orders, which is a little different from sometimes. Both players have an artillery barrage. They can spend one of their orders to use this. And you can't use it with the reserve orders, but you can reduce either Barclay or Bagration's. The Russians have this special destruction marker, which is going to allow them to wreck things. They can use it in one of 2 ways. It's always going to go in the cup. When it's drawn, the Russian player can either burn a village or destroy a bridge. To burn a village, he has to have an infantry unit in that village hex and no enemy adjacent to it. He announces he's burning the village. He hops out of the village into a space not adjacent to an enemy. And there's an on fire marker that goes there. And maybe those are on the back of the rubble. Yeah, they're on the back of the rubble. Oop. Back's giving me some trouble. The next time a destruction AM is drawn, well, every time a destruction AM is drawn, you roll a die for each of the villages, and on a 0 through 3, the fire goes out and it turns into a rubble marker. And there's one of those already in the game over here because they already destroyed a village and the fire's gone. And rubble is going to give us a little bit of defensive ability and a pain in the ass to move through. A burning village, you just can't go through and it blocks line of sight. They can also destroy bridges. Now, it looks to me like all the bridges are fine in the game on this one. He has to have an infantry unit available adjacent, and no enemy unit adjacent, and no enemy artillery unit within effective range. And this automatically destroys the bridge. See, there's not much chance of the Russian destroying a bridge. I don't know about that. There's a bridge here. The artillery is not quite in effective range of it. Of course, the Russians aren't there yet. They probably don't want to destroy bridges that they haven't crossed yet, though. So, I'm not sure why I'm in Borodino itself. That's not a huge defensive benefit if the artillery is nearby. Kutuzov, fat, tired, and gouty. He has a movement allowance of 4 on his counter. The command counters have gotten a lot more complicated. The question mark there indicates his number of orders he has. The 2 is, I think, his orders delay. The 4 here is his movement allowance. Let's see if we can find Napoleon. Napoleon has 3 orders, and no, he doesn't have a delay. He shouldn't have a delay. Let's look to see what they are. Orders range. The delay ratings on Kutuzov, it's up here, it's this 5, which isn't bad at all. It means he can assign orders fairly easily. He's got a command rating DRM that modifies his chance of affecting a command roll, which is a little different. That I don't think there were that many numbers on the old ones. Napoleon, well, Napoleon's gotten old, and he also has an infection. For this reason, he gets to move based on a die roll, anywhere from 0 to 9. If he really has to pee and has to run to a tree, he can go up to 9, I guess. The Russians can't use extended movement. A few notes on the battlefield. There's a depression down here, a couple of nice redoubts built on the hills, some limited breastworks over there. Those are those lines. The stream has some pretty hefty banks to it. The Moskva River cannot be crossed except at a bridge. I don't know if there is one. By the way, I found rules on the fords. They allow you to use the road to completely negate the river, the stream. So wherever there was a ford here, so this could have been negated, I guess. Okay, the Utitsa Woods. So Davout has a suggestion for Napoleon to make a big outflank to the left. There's an option for it in the game, but the woods themselves are not mostly on the map. There's a straggling existence of them. Stacking, artillery can stack up to 8 strength points per hex instead of the normal 6. Russian Cossacks. There's a bunch of these, almost as bad as the militia. They have nothing on their back, and they will go into the withdrawn box if they take a disorder result. And then they might presumably come back, but probably not. There are Russian Jaegers in the game, but they don't count as Jaegers. There's Russian militia. That's these suckers. And they're basically way underarmed for this period. They cannot stack. They have no zones of control. They can't attack. They don't count towards any collapse. And if they take any losses, any result whatsoever, they are eliminated. Any adverse result. Okay. There's rules for the French flanking maneuver. I'm not going to play with it. But essentially what it allows Napoleon to do is to send a force of units off the map, and it starts rolling to come in. And depending on the success of the rolls, he has to roll an adjusted 12 for them to enter on a then-sided die, with the highest number being a 9. If he rolls a 7 through 11, nothing happens, but he'll get a +1 to his next die roll. If he rolls a 2 through 6, he has the option to recall the flanking forces and to bring them back onto the board, or he can just leave them out there kind of stumbling around through the woods. And it doesn't require orders for that. For victory points for this is going to be a kill 'em scenario. The French get 3 points for each activation group that they wreck, and 10 if it's the Guard. The Russians get 4 for each French activation group, other than the French Imperial Guard that collapses. They get 10 for the Guard. I'm guessing the activation groups are based on these rather than the activation markers. Therefore, Murat's Cav is actually worth quite a few points if you can wreck it all. And those Russian armies aren't just these monolithic things. I'm guessing. There's some geographic points that are spread around. It works out it's 3 points for 3417. This is not in the rules. It's only in the errata. That's a French-only points. And then anywhere in the breastworks is worth, in the readouts is worth 1 point for the Russians. And I think that's it. So we'll get started on this one. It doesn't look terribly long. It's probably going to take me into the weekend pretty heavily, though, which is a pity because I had something light I wanted to do. But okay. Well, the French have the automatic initiative at the beginning of the game. I've decided on my orders positions to give. Eugene over on this flank, try to grab the river crossings, and Poniatowski on this flank, because I think this is actually where I think I'm going to try to land my first heavy blow. And for that I'm going to have Murat moving his cav to support. I don't think the cav over here is terribly helpful, but I can use a couple of units from over here to face. There's some Russian cav over here. Basically, I am going to be pushing through some heavy units, though. The Grenadiers are over here, and I was seriously considering sending Davout's First Corps to slam into them. I don't want to go right up against the redoubts. I think that's foolishness. I'm always one for trying to outflank positions and take them from multiple angles. Alright, let us push forward. And the first initiative, Davout comes slamming into Borodino itself. Artillery fire and a massive melee attack that I didn't need anywhere near as many troops. Crushed one unit over here and drove the other one back. The artillery fire drove the unit back. And now we get our first pick. And what do we get? And you can see, and I'm turning my face away, but, you know, your fingers don't control things. So this is where things get kind of complicated. I'm going to have Barclay's first. Barclay is, I believe, the white bordered stuff over here. And none of it's under command automatically. I can make rolls for some of it. That's the side that's been under attack. So, well, we'll see. I've got a lot of different units to move over there, all under one activation chit. Forgot to mention the Russians for their one activation. Well, varying amount of activations. They chose to move the artillery reserve forward. I feel like if I have any chance of holding this, it's by getting a lot of guns up on the line and just blasting the crap out of the French army. And my activations went for both Barclay and Bagration. I made an attempt to roll for this unit here, this yellow unit, trying to get it into the line here. That didn't succeed, so I'm moving other units up there, just trying to stall Eugene from getting across, because he looks like the threat right now. Got some lucky artillery fire on this guy here, but then I attacked him and couldn't get a coordination and just ended up being driven back. I was hoping for, at least even odds. I ended up with a -1. The up steep slope, strangely, now gives a plus. He keeps changing his mind on, what he's going to affect and what not. And maybe it has to do with the battlefields in particular. Certainly each one is different. But going down a steep slope gives you a +1. And going down a steep level gives you a +1. And going down an elevation level gives you a +1. So actually I probably should have been better than I was. I still got a crappy roll, but I think I get a morale check there. I don't think they're all cumulative. No, they're not. They're not. There's something that says they're not. It's not in here. But yeah. I'm trying to see the difference between a steep elevation and a steep slope, and there goes the wire. Crap. Just trying not to see that. Yeah, I don't know what that steep elevation level is. I think it's just a repetitive line, essentially. Okay. Got my misinformation earlier. I was talking about woods over on that side of Moscow. No. It's going to be this set of woods. The Utista woods is over here. So this is where it would have been made difficult for the outflank, and it would be swinging around this way, not through the swamp and trying to deal with the river and such, which looked really silly to me when I started paying attention to the terrain. Again, I'm no student of the battle, so this is, I think, the first game I've ever played on Borodino, actually. Although I would be interested in giving the Labatt treatment or something like Viva l'Empereur a shot on it. The second activation for the Bagration side, I used it for some rallies that for areas that things went badly to get my lines a little better position. Then Davout and who's this? Poniatowski both got actions. Davout made his successful check to move forward at full speed instead of not at all. And then I got the destruction chit, and frankly I can't figure out anywhere I want to burn. The only place I'm in that I think I'm allowed to, because this is artillery not infantry here, is over here at Utitsa. And the problem with that is I outgun Poniatowski in terms of artillery. So I would rather keep this solid line and see if I can blow them back with artillery fire for now. And if I set fire to that thing, I gotta withdraw out of it, and then I leave a smoking wreck. I leave a defect in my line, not much of one. It just doesn't look like a good idea, though, to me. Davout, on the other hand, has gotten a load of artillery into place, kind of in an exposed position. If the Russians want to charge those guns, they might be able to destroy them, but they also probably will come under such heavy fire moving into their zones of control that they'll get blasted back. You know, earlier in the series, I complained about Cav not really having a zone of influence, but they sort of have one. At least in this one. I don't know if it's in the earlier roles, but within one hex in their frontal hex, you can't launch a charge through that hex. I think I did mention that. I think that came up maybe in the 2.0 rules or something. I'm not sure. There are a lot of chits left in the cup, and I'm not going to make them through them all tonight, so I'm going to probably come to this tomorrow and see if I can finish up the turn in the morning.
Okay, big swing of French orders chits came at once. Double Junot, and I countermarched him over here. I like to put more weight on the flanks where I'm attacking. Notice, geez, I forgot to move the rest of Eugene's units, you know, the ones that don't look like his. I wish they were distinguished in some way. And Ney got a double move as well. I rolled for Junot for one activation. For Ney, I'm just sort of pushing forward. I'm not really that worried about it. But because I was doing an extended movement to get down here, I needed that. Murat's Cav, I picked my two units over here on the wing and on the other wing. And the rest of them, I didn't even bother moving. There's just not a lot of room here for the Cav to maneuver to do anything. And they got plenty of speed. And then the Imperial Guard got to go. And there's no restriction against them moving a little bit, so I inched them forward a little. Let's see what's next. What do we got in the cup? Lots of Ruskies in the cup. There's nothing but positioning going on right now. The reserve, I start pulling this artillery up, and this is going to be a pain in the ass because it's going to be intermingled with everything else. It's such a big clump of artillery, it's going to be stretching the line, just providing a stiffening where there isn't artillery already, which is kind of not the idea of a massed artillery battalion like that, but on the defense, I think, actually anyhow you look at it, I think I just want my artillery interspersed. That's just the way I think. I'm not like Napoleon or Alexander. I'm not fond of massed artillery. It has uses, but in this game, you don't get to fire this massed artillery with the every other anyway, with the adjacency bonus, unless you do an artillery barrage anyhow. So, and it doesn't make much difference. They don't have to be part of the same unit or anything. Cav reserve shifted around a little bit. The Eugene's 4th is moving through, and you're beginning to see the weakness of the French units. They don't have the will to keep going the way the French army usually does in the TNG series. One thing I noted with this that's kind of cute is secondary layers of defense work do really cool things. So if there was another layer of breastworks out here, it would cause the attacks to face decent units under bad conditions, might break up some of the attack, and then they have a really hard time hitting the next layer of defenses without withdrawing first, so that they can, even the units that won, so that they can regroup and undisorganize, as it were. This system really allows for that to have an effect, and I'm seeing that over here. If the French manage to punch through here, well, some of the units will probably end up disordered, and they'll have a really hard time getting the traffic jam to work, just because of the stacking and movement restrictions, as well as the orders restrictions, where you don't get to move everything at once. You know, it's not like I'm going to be able to slide Ney into that position. I know we were talking about crab walk over in the other Triumphant Glory, but when you've got a packed situation like this, you ain't going to see much of that. I guess that's about it. The Russians got to move some of their units on this west, the First Army section, but it's really hard to deal with this kind of clutter Largely I'm trying to move these guys, or I did move these guys, onto that first line of defense. Make it tough for the French to make that ground, because that ground's kind of painful. If I lose that, it threatens the Great Redoubt. You know, it looks like the second line of defense is the important thing. I'm not so sure. It's a fallback, but I don't view it as the more important of the two. And many of my heavier units are in the back, and I have to shift them around to get them up to the front. Instead of these kind of like Jaegers up front and stuff. What the hell? And the power didn't charge. Great. Okay, so I ended up the turn. We had Poniatowski and Davout. These are the big things. Poniatowski moved forward for an attack. It wasn't terribly effective. I charged, trying to hit the Cossacks here, but without the infantry support, they refused to go in. Ended up having to face this infantry. I didn't want to create square, because his morale's so low, he'd get disordered if he failed. It seemed like I had better odds, and I did, and broke them by standing firm against them. Davout got his activation roll, and you can see he tried to engage as well. He didn't actually fight either. He's got decent units, so it's kind of hard to believe how much failure there was along there. Some artillery fire damaged this one. He was a target because he doesn't have a gun under him, so you know, it's like, yeah, it's less likely to hit, but I can at least succeed in doing something, although I don't know what, because there's backup units that can be flung into that position. So it's not like I'm going to break it with just artillery fire from the front, but I really don't want to hit those redoubts straight on. I'm not into that kind of abuse. The Imperial Guard shifted forward a little bit more. Then, because there's almost no disadvantage to it, well, there is no disadvantage really, Kutuzov moved forward his artillery reserve. He can do that because he had them under orders. They only moved partial, but you know, it gives them a little extra boost in movement. And now the next thing that should happen is I check for these, but I don't really like following the sequence of play when it doesn't make a lot of sense and doesn't fit my video terribly well. So Kutuzov stayed where he was. I couldn't figure out anywhere better for him to be. But Nappy made his roll and moved forward a few hexes so he can command Davout and Ney, in case an opportunity opens itself up where I want to launch an attack up there. I'm going to make my main commands be on the flanks. I may not have Murat under command. He doesn't look like he's doing much for me. But Junot is a possibility. Not sure how much he really helps either, because I've got Davout covering this part of the line. So now I make a couple of... No, I don't. I slide these forward. Okay. And then we go to the beginning of the next turn. We're going to roll for initiative, crap like that. Just like over in the other TNG games. Okay, as we push into the second turn, I've marked one of the commands for Napoleon on the flanking command. I'm not using the flanking rolls, but I'm using that because I'm pulling the artillery barrage. I'm actually taking that as his initiative action. He almost certainly, he almost always will get initiative in this game. He's got a +3. Kutuzov has +0. So, and I took the orders off Murat. I just don't think I'm going to be using my cav much right away. But otherwise, I stayed with Eugene and Poniatowski because Ney and Davout are both pretty decent commanders. They can probably be as active as they need to be, if they do need to be. Picks, but I get the feeling in this game not a whole hell of a lot actually happens. The artillery barrage, you know, definitely weakened some of the positions here. Then the Russians got one each for the West and East armies. Kutuzov did not manage to get his change of orders, so he's got a no orders bonus for next time. And a little bit of shifting here, but I'm not doing any attacks or anything. They just don't seem like an effective idea in general. And then Murat's cav, I pushed some forward, no biggie there. The reserve artillery fired.
And I had to be careful because I started screwing up with the which one the yellow guy is Bagration's second army. It's really hard to tell things apart in this game. You know, they tried to put some more color differentiation in with the army divisions as opposed to simply the command divisions. But the activation shit is really one color, and it's kind of disturbing. I wish they had done the big color for the activation shit and maybe a stripe for the actual activation formations, simply because it's really much harder to tell who you're allowed to move and who you're not. On the other hand, of course, it would then be hard to tell with just a stripe maybe which command is under orders and which one isn't. So I don't know. It's just these little yellow and white lines look too similar to each other for my taste. So here's a yellow one. It's pretty clear on here. And then here's a white one. And that's absolutely invisible if I don't zoom in on the camera. You know, out about here I can't see it through the camera, or I can barely see it. With my naked eyes, I cannot see it. It's just the color choices and combination. And so anyway, nothing to do with that though, because these are really, really apparent. But because I've got them mixed in with my regular units, the artillery ended up firing in with them, and I had to kind of roll back some results. That artillery is really not able to do much except fire. There isn't a lot of room in there. There's a lot of artillery in this battle. As you know, got to move slightly forward. Davout failed to get his attack, but he pulled some units back. You can see he's not in the happiest of shape, and actually we've got some casualties coming because after we did the first army, that's the yellow guys, they launched an attack here and did some artillery fire up here that was effective. You can see some withdrawn French units. There's also some destroyed artillery. When artillery is disordered and takes another hit, or that would have disordered it, it is permanently eliminated. I'm not going to track them in the permanently eliminated box. I'm going to keep that so that I can keep track of the actual units, the commands that are damaged. I don't want to confuse things with artillery because it's the non-artillery that count for formation destruction. These turns are long just because of the huge quantity of units and the, you know, not in any particular point, but there's just so much engaged at once in this battle that I find myself having to take breaks pretty often. Okay, we had a big series of French. First, started off with Poniatowski, who made mixed assaults. You can see he gained this hill here, and also some withdrawals to try to recover. Between artillery and assaults, he's pushed the Russians back a little bit. Then Ney, things did not go well for Ney. And if I can avoid from making anyone too ill, I tried to attack all along the line, including here. And this guy went in, this guy damaged himself as these two failed to go in at all. So now this unit is kind of off on its own in a dangerous location. He actually had a follow-through attack, but he didn't want to hit that crap. Then over to Eugene and the 4th, which looked kind of promising, but the artillery didn't bust things up enough. I didn't get any edge over here, although I did get this big attack of firepower here. So I didn't want to launch the attacks. I held off on them there. The Imperial Guard slithered forward a little bit. And then Junot, I rolled to get an activation on him because I would have liked to pound the Russian left flank a little harder. All I got was some artillery fire, which knocked them out of Utitsa. Already feeling pretty bloody in a way that most of them don't because the routing units go flying off. Putting them into the withdrawn box makes them feel more dead, sort of, than when they're just flying back. It's actually less bloody in the sense that
you don't have the routing units colliding and causing all kind of problems where units are getting destroyed from that. And with things so densely packed, though, you're seeing some of that anyhow. So far, I haven't lost a unit, a regular unit, just the artillery, which that artillery duel's being pretty impressive. So, Cav Reserve went first, not much there. Davout, I didn't press too hard, just on this flank, and you can see Bagration got the next action and kind of pulled back, while his artillery up here did some damage. Ney took quite a bit of hits, you can see across here. And then the artillery reserve, the Russian artillery reserve, got to unload. I kind of wish they could do the battery fire, given that they've got the orders right now. But that's not an opportunity. They would get that. They would get tremendous firepower if I can get them out of the command and get it into one of these units, so that I can put that battery fire into play. The Russians definitely want it here. I guess that's about it. We're kind of running down, but doing just a handful of guys is tiresome. Okay, as we move on to 8:30 in the morning, we had a series here at Imperial Guard. Poniatowski made a successful charge, drove a couple of Cossacks into nowhere. Really outnumbered by them, but they're such crap, they just disappear. Eugene tried to press forward. He got up here, had 2 units attacking. This unit got damaged, and we'll see why it's not there in a moment. A destruction marker, I couldn't figure out anything I could do with it. And then Ney, who is kind of out of units here. His 1 unit also disappeared for the same reason, which is that the Russians triggered the artillery, which, since it's active, they can do, and within range of Kutuzov, and did a fire action. And that's why there's some disordered Russian artillery here. When it fires, it has a chance of disordering. But they managed to rack up some significant losses on the French. Now these are all just going to recovery, and they have a chance of coming back. The Russians had a couple failed checks and a lot of units going in there for later. Nobody's got to worry about units falling apart yet, although if Ney has a bad series of rolls, he may be close. I think he's only got two units sitting here, unless there's a third one under there. Yeah, there's a third one there. So he would have to lose another unit for that to go over. Actually, them being in the withdrawn or recovery box is bad enough to trigger a collapse. So it's a good thing he's not. And I got to worry about these, because these aren't all the command they necessarily say. Oh no, this is 4th Corps. 1st Corps is what I have to worry about. So CM is part of this part of 1st Corps that actually counts as 1st Corps, as opposed to this part of 1st Corps, which counts as part of 4th Corps. It would be easier with the colors. It's hard enough keeping the counts and seeing, hey, am I wrecked yet? But Eugene almost got a good foothold on the redoubt, and then got driven back. Okay, and another failure on the charging. No, I didn't have it plugged in. Neat. Okay. Second no orders for the Russians. So they're stuck with the artillery as their only activity, without a barrage. French won the initiative. They did take a barrage, and it was pretty effective. If you can see, the smaller redoubt over here has been largely cleared by their fire, and they also kind of broke this territory up, so we might be able to get some ground there. A few problems in terms of advancing, but Davout looks like he can go in here. I switched Poniatowski out for Junot, because Poniatowski is getting a little worn out, and Junot is fresh. I figure the Poniatowski units can sit back and recover, and maybe they'll still be able to get an attack in, but largely I think they've done about as much as they can for a little bit. It's not like Junot's much bigger, but he's got a little bit more strength. So this looked like an impressive setup, but Davout got the next action shit over here. And you can see he didn't gain that much. There were a couple guns here I managed to disable or disorder, and I took them. But any attacks along here are hard because these areas are cleared of enemies, so I couldn't move up next to him and attack him. I could have done it here, but he's got artillery. And it costs too many movement points to get up here. The artillery can't climb it at all. The infantry, it costs 2 for the redoubt and 1 more for the hill. So I would have to be adjacent for it to be the 4 movement point cost. I didn't want to be adjacent. I don't want to be in a position where I'm, you know, right under the redoubt. So, yeah, who knows? I might get another move. These guys didn't move because they were covering the guns here. Got some attempts at advance here. These guys got repulsed, but we got a breakthrough here, and then we're also on the hill here. So there's some possibility that I'll take that hill if I get a movement before whoever yellow dude is. That'll be Bagration. Okay, couple activations here. Cav reserve. Just moved a couple cav up here. Imperial Guard, I shifted my artillery up into place. Did some long-range bombardment over here, but not to any effect. Then Barclay actually got 2 activations with Eugene squeezed in. And he was trying to hold this line, but it didn't work. Eugene managed to punch through it over here. And I decided to try to fall back to around Gorky, but that's going to threaten the Great Redoubt. I've got to get more units up there. And one of the problems is, this is the divide. This is where, you know, Barclay and Bagration were connected, and now we're seeing Barclay falling back, and I've got to get something up here. And there ain't a lot that I can put in there. Bagration has some cav back here, but he doesn't have a lot of infantry in place there. He doesn't really have enough infantry to cover this right now, mainly because so many of the units are in the routed box or whatever. And he also is responsible for holding this flank. So I would have rather seen Bagration or Barclay take command in the Great Redoubt, but there wasn't time to do that kind of fancy shifting around. You're left with, you know, the dividing line that you had. And this is hard to defend when I can't coordinate between them. I can't do any kind of counterattacks or anything that are very effective. And now it's leaving a gaping hole there. Sometimes I stretch my narrative to where it's too complex for me to remember right at the edge of it, and that's what we have here. Bagration did some shifting to try to improve his defensive position a little bit. Primarily over here. There wasn't much I could do here. Junot kind of traffic jammed. Eugene launched a massive scale of attack here, but it didn't all go over. I got attacks here and here, and the rest of this kind of stayed out, which saved these artillery. Ney just recovering, and then Davout similarly a failed attack here, but otherwise I've taken this redoubt almost entirely, and I've cut through from behind, getting myself out of command. Some of those militia in kind of a follow-through attack, I was just like, well, what the hell, let's just get some of that crap out of the way. And yeah, it disappeared pretty easily. It just has no capability of standing against formed troops. The biggie being, quality is so big a deal here. So I was fighting at 20 to 20, 1 to 1, no odds benefits, a -1 for the woods, but +6 for the quality. And any result, they just go over into the dead pile. So they're pretty damn useless. And the Cossacks are pretty close to the same. And the problem is the Russians have a lot of crap like that
that just is not serving a purpose on the battlefield except to create traffic jams, as far as I can see. Okay, Poniatowski actually made a successful attack, wiped out some Cossacks in a follow-through attack. They didn't get a chance to withdraw because he hit the infantry, knocked them out, hit the Cossacks, knocked them out. You know, I mean, into the withdrawal box. Cav reserve, I'm beginning to push Cav up a little harder. I figure I'm going to have some room to maneuver up here. And both sides get to play with their Cav once I break through back here. The Russians have a bunch of Cav too that really isn't too helpful in this kind of static defense. Ney bombarded this guy out of the way and then pushed over here, freeing up room for Eugene to attack. As well as maybe taking a central position, but he's got so many wiped units that nothing good can come of an attack right now. And then the artillery reserve, they did a pretty significant bombardment. They actually knocked somebody into the withdrawal box and destroyed some artillery, some enemy artillery, not their own. And then kind of pulled back a little bit because it looks like they're in a lot of risk there and over here, etc. So, making pretty good ground here. Okay, for the next set, Poniatowski essentially didn't do much at all, but then the awesome fire of the Russian artillery unleashed again. And it really is impressive what it can do. You can see we have more losses over here. Beating up on Eugene's stuff. Bagration continues his falling back. This is a lost cause, and unfortunately it's got walls to the rear. Which, you know, is a good thing if we get outflanked, but if we lose the position, it's really lost. These guys trying to inch their way out. Most of it doesn't count. I'm just trying to save the real units, the hell with the militia. And the Imperial Guard crept up. Some artillery fire. From what I can tell, they can still shoot back here. The way the line of sight works in this game. Because this is at the same height, they're assumed to be visible, not on the reverse side of the slope or anything silly like that. You know, it's a simple game. Avoids a lot of the details, and it seems to work pretty well, actually. Russian artillery reserve notwithstanding, though, the Russians are in serious trouble here. So, at the end of the turn, let's see, we had Junot try to launch an attack, and he pretty much failed. I don't know if he got an attack in on this hex and partially succeeded, or if he just didn't go in. But, and we got the destruction counter again, nothing I want to do with it. We had some units that were pretty much off the board. So 3 units have collapsed, Doktorov, Kreutz, and Tuchkov. 2 of those 3 have no units left on the board, so they can't possibly recover, even if they could recover units in a disordered state. That's these 2. They're just gone, completely wiped out, and I can take their well, they don't have chits, but yeah. The other one still has a center of operations, but all its units are permanently disrupted. And that means no artillery fire, essentially, and very little of any use there. So, you know, we're beginning to really see the Russian army collapsing to the extent that maybe I have to throw the guards in to have any kind of effective use at all. And unfortunately, I throw the guards in. That means I don't get the artillery barrage. The Russians did, again, fire off their artillery, their reserve, using the reserve rolls, because they're right up there with Kutuzov. I haven't moved him. I'll probably pull him back a hex. And let's see how far Nappy gets to move, because he wants to... I don't know. He doesn't really want to move too much further forward at this point. Okay, he can move 2. I'll push him there. He's in danger of being pushed back, but it seems like a pretty extreme measure to try to gain that ground. The French recovered an important piece here because that puts this piece in command. Ooh. They also got some recoveries here, but you can see they're taking some permanent losses as well. It's just they're not at the level at which their total routes, etc., have broken any of their units. They have bigger units overall, I think. Davout 31, Eugene 20. Some of Davout's are over there, though. Some of these others, Poniatowski, are more capable of being destroyed. But if we look at the things that were wrecked here, they're all fairly small units in terms of total pieces there. All right. I think this is a good time to send this one up. This battle may be pretty much over fairly soon, to the extent that the Russians just look like they're collapsing everywhere. I'm not sure why if I'm screwing something up or if it really is just this easy for the French. It doesn't feel much like Borodino if the French aren't really getting pummeled. And it's not like they aren't taking losses. And that's the whole thing. It's like the game gives you an impression maybe that things are going more smoothly than they really are, but the French army may be getting pretty badly battered when you start seeing the amount of counters that were in here. But their higher morale means they come back. But they don't really look like they have a whole hell of a lot of striking power available. I've got the guards. I'm not sure I need them as long as Davout can take this position, although they might be the way to take the Great Redoubt. And the Russian army just doesn't have a lot of offensive punch to it. Maybe the Cav will, when I fall back here beyond the redoubts, maybe it'll be able to do some serious damage. Or maybe I'll just chicken out and want to leave and withdraw with as much of my army as I can to lick my wounds. All right, let's send this one up because, like I said, I have the feeling we're not going to go the full length of the battle.